Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to share some whimsical magnolia cards using the new Whimsical Magnolia collection from Crafty and Meraki. And I'm using them with different ways to create or to add a little bit of shimmer and shine to your creations. So we have a stamp set, a coordinating die set, a press plate set, as well as a layering stencil set. And that coordinating die set works both with that stamp set as well as the press plate set. I'm also using the Gilded Greetings hot foil plate as well as the coordinating die set and the Flutter Dream press plate set. Now that Flutter Dream currently is free with a purchase of $75 or more. But that doesn't last forever, so it's not always going to be free. I believe it will be available for purchase after it's no longer a freebie. So the first way I'm using the press plate is to use it with my Glimmer machine. I have my Glimmer machine hot here, and I put that press plate on the hot base, layered my aura colored Glimmer foil on top of it with the pretty side down. I'm foiling on top of Hammermill Cardstock, put my plates on, press the timer button, and once that timer is done, I will put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. You need both the heat and the pressure for foiling. Now, I am only using pieces of A2 Hammermill Cardstock, so I'm not pressing the entire plate. If I wanted to get the entire image from the whole plate, I would use a larger piece. I'd probably use a piece of 5.5 by 8.5, but I don't necessarily need all the flowers for the designs that I'm wanting to do. And then when it comes to the Gilded Greetings, I'm only really using a couple sentiments. So I didn't really need to use or need to foil all of them. Probably should have, because then I would have had a lot more sentiments to save for future projects, but I wasn't necessarily thinking about future projects when I was doing it. Now I'm also going to foil that Flutter Dream press plate. I want the first card to have lots of beautiful foiling. I like the aura foil because it has an iridescent or opalescent shine to it. So not only do you see the gold, but you see the different colors on there as well. And I think that works lovely for both florals as well as butterflies. Anytime I do foiling, I always like to do solid hot foiling at the same time. I don't necessarily use them for the projects that I'm working on. When I do them, I will be using the solid hot foil of my florals for this. I won't be using the butterflies. However, it's much easier to store those solid hot foiled images on cardstock rather than storing the extra pieces of foil. So I just do it right away. It only takes an extra few minutes. You definitely need to have a solid hot foil plate in order to do that as well. Sometimes I don't even use the solid hot foiled images. I will use the extra pieces to die cut little pieces for whatever projects I'm using. So not only can you use them as solid hot foiled pieces, but you could also use it just as some metallic cardstock. Once I have all of those pieces foiled, I'm going to use the coordinating die set and I'm going to cut out all of those images. You can see it goes really, really quickly with the foiling. Once that Glimmer machine is warm, it just is a matter of layering your pieces with the Hammermill cardstock and then pressing the timer button, waiting for that timer button and putting it through the die cutting machine. With the layering or with the coordinating die set, I love the fact that all of the dies are in one plate, so you can cut everything out all at once. It's not a matter of lining individual dies up. It's just one die set, and that works the same with the stamp set, which is fantastic. It's nice to be able to cut a bunch of stuff all out at once. So once I have all of my regular foiled images die cut, I'm going to foil my solid hot foiled images. Now, like I said before, some of the negative pieces, I like to use the extra pieces as like metallic cardstock for die cutting for future projects. So when I'm placing my Best Ever Craft tape to hold that die down, I'm kind of careful where I place that tape. If there's a larger area with foil, I know that that will be a larger area in order to be able to die cut later. So I don't want to put that tape there because the tape running through the die cutting machine on that foil, it affects the foil and you won't be able to use it that way. With everything die cut, I can put it to the side and I can start coloring my images. I'm using Copic markers to color these images. So for the pinky red colors, I have R22, R24, R27, and then my R27 kind of runs out of ink, so I pull in R37. For my purple color, I have V17. For the greens, I have YG63 and 67. And for my browns, I have E33 and 35. So I start with my browns, and I'm just using that for the stems of the magnolias. Could have also used the greens, but I wanted to pull in a little bit of brown there. I think it works really well with the gold foil as well as the solid gold foil. I don't do a lot of deep blending with this. I use my E33 to color in the stems, and then I go in with that E35 and just add it to the darker areas. I will go back in with my E33 and just blend that all together. When I'm blending different colors, I start with my light color, then I go with my medium color, and then if I'm doing a third color, I will do the dark color next. And then for these projects, I will just go right back with the light color. Typically, I will do light, medium, dark, medium, light, but that just adds extra layers of color and it deepens the color. And when it comes to the flower petals, I don't want my flower petals to be too dark. So for my flower petals, I go light, medium, dark, light. And that will make a little bit more sense once I go in and do those flower petals. After doing the brown, I go in with my green color, and I'm just doing the E60 or the YG63 first, the lighter color. I'll go in with the 67, which is the darker color, and then I'll go back in with that light and just blend those two together. Another option would be to just do the dark color and then blend the light one over top of it, to do that in one motion. When I first learned to use Copics like 20 some years ago, I learned the light, medium, dark, medium, light. And it's only recently that I've seen people doing the shading first and then kind of going from dark to light. And while I love the look of that, it's not what I'm used to doing. So I kind of have gotten into a habit of doing it the way that I like doing it. But I suggest trying both ways and seeing which works best for you, because neither one is right or wrong. They both are effective. And the other way just might be the way that works best for you. So when it comes to the flowers, I'm doing the R22 first. Then I go in with the R24, and to keep with the petals, I start with the darker color towards the bottom, and I kind of flick my way up, curving around the shape of the petal where it needs it. And then I'll go in with the R27 or R37 when I get to the point that I have run out of ink, and that happens off screen. I'll do my first couple flowers on screen, and then I do the rest of them off screen because it's fairly repetitive. Once it comes to the dark color, once again, I will just kind of flick my pen up. I won't go quite as high or far as my medium color because I want to be able to see a light area, a medium area, and a dark area. But I like the look for petals of just kind of that flicking of the color. It just adds a little bit more visual texture to the flowers. And then when it comes to going back with the light color, I'm really, really light when I do that. I just put a little bit of ink there to blend it. I'm not heavy-handed when it comes to that ink. Again, I'm wanting to make sure not to get too much ink on these petals. I want the flowers to still be fairly light. So I die cut my pieces first before coloring them. In my opinion, it just makes it a little bit easier to move them around while coloring. I also will kind of keep my right hand, which is my coloring hand, in the same position and just move my piece around. When it comes to taking the medium and dark colors and flicking them out, I find it's easiest to have the same position rather than trying to move my hand around trying to get a different positioning. So here's the finished result of that first one. Anytime I do my coloring, I'll look at it a little bit closer just to see if there's an area that needs to be blended a little bit more, or if there's an area I missed. The thing with Copics is as they're drying, they're continuing to blend. So I will regularly, not necessarily be happy or not necessarily love my coloring, but once I've let them dry, often I'll like it a lot better once it's dry because it just continues to blend as it's drying. Another nice thing about working with Copic markers is they're very forgiving. So if you blend them the first time and you want it a little bit of a deeper blend, or there's an area that you want a little bit more color to, you can easily add more color to it. So you don't have to do it once and do it quickly and make sure that it's absolutely perfect. I find that it's fairly forgiving in the fact that you can keep adding more color. Another option, if you want to take away color, is to use the blender pen, because that removes color. So you can take a little bit of color out if you find it's a little bit too heavy. The main thing though is I'm really light-handed with my color, because I don't want that ink to pool outside of my foiled edges. And I love ink blending or Copic coloring on Hammermill cardstock. It works really, really nice. When it comes to my butterflies, I use a little bit of a different technique. So I'm starting with, I think this was R22, which is the lightest of my pinky corally colors. And I'm going from the outside of the butterfly, flicking the marker in to blend it with the purple. Because the purple and pink aren't from the same color family, if I were to just do the purple and then blend the pink over top of it, I would get a little bit of a different color. And I wanted to keep that purple fairly true to the color that it is. So I will go in with one color, flick my way in. Then I will go in with the other color, flick my way out towards that other color, and then repeat that process. Just remember that the more ink you add, the darker the color is going to be. But as you flick it in, you'll get a blend between those two colors. And this is a great way to blend two opposite colors and not create mud. It's a really fun, different technique for blending that I love doing for butterflies especially, because then you can get creative with your colors. For my second butterfly, I'm actually only using one butterfly in the video, but I wanted to have a couple options. So when it came time to assembling my card, I could pick which one I felt fit best with the look of the card and the look that I was going for. So for the second one, I'm doing it opposite. I'm doing purple on the outside of the wings. And this is one of the reasons why I do this. This pink one here is the R24, which is the medium shade. So this is one of the reasons why I'm coloring multiples. When coloring this, I thought it was going to be that first butterfly that I was going to be using on my final card. I thought it was going to pop off more from my flowers because that purple was towards the center of the butterfly. But when it came time to assemble my card, it was actually this one that I ended up using because it had more purple to it. It popped off a little bit more. It was a little bit more visible. So by having both of them, it just gave me more options. I can save that second one for a future card, so it's not going to go to waste, but I love having those options and I love having them ready to go while I'm creating rather than having to stop and go color a butterfly in the middle of assembling my card. I'm adding a little bit of glisten stickles to the butterfly wings just to add a little bit of texture and sparkle. Glisten is a stickles that is transparent, but it has really fine gold glitter to it. So it works really well with that aura foil. I waited for that to completely dry before using my detail scissors to cut out this butterfly. There's not a die that cuts this out, so it does need to be fussy cut. We've been spoiled over the years by having stamps, dies, and press plates that have dies to match. So the funny thing is I used to love fussy cutting and I used to do it all the time, but I was really annoyed doing this. I didn't want to be doing the fussy cutting, but I wanted it cut out. But it's really funny how, I'm just only mentioning that because it's funny how times have changed. I never once thought about it, and I loved doing it years ago when we didn't have dies as an option. But now that we do, this isn't the funnest thing to do all the time. So I don't necessarily do it often, only when there's a look that I'm going for and it requires it. It's really not that hard to do, but you can see with my cutting, my right hand, my scissors hand doesn't really change positions all that much. I do turn around with my left hand and rotate that butterfly and move that so that it cuts properly and cuts how I want. Move it so that it aligns with how I want, or I have how those scissors are positioned. For my card base, I have a piece of Inca gold cardstock here. This is a gold cardstock that has that iridescent shine to it that works perfectly with the aura foil. I'm using that as the mat for my card. If you don't have this cardstock, you can use that aura foil just as is with the solid hot foil plate and foil a piece to create it yourself. I happen to have this cardstock. I've had it for a few years and I'm trying to use it up, so it works really perfectly for this. I used a piece of Peacock Cardstock for my background. My mat with that Inca Gold cardstock was cut to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. My Peacock Cardstock here is cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And I chose that cardstock because it really had a good contrast with my flowers. I really wanted to be able to see them and have them pop off of the background. And this is the perfect one for that. I'm gluing my pieces on with some Best Ever or Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. This is perfect for not only gluing your die cuts, but gluing your cards together. And in between my flower pieces, I am putting those solid hot foiled florals there as well. I really like the look of the two together. It really it pulls out that foil color, and it gives it a little bit of contrast between the flowers just on their own. When I had my base of my card assembled and my acrylic block on there, I used that so that I could place my flowers to make sure that I was going to like the arrangement that I was going to do. And then I could just put that block to the side and have that arrangement saved. For some of these solid foiled flowers, you don't necessarily have to use the whole thing. You can use your detailed scissors to trim them down. Any of the areas that are trimmed are going to be covered with that butterfly or with the floral die cut. So we're not going to see those edges, but we might as well, utilize our tools and customize them how we would like them to go. Once I have all of my florals down, I can add my butterfly as well as my sentiment. I'm using the congratulations sentiment from the Gilded Greetings foil plate. You could also use one of the sentiments that comes with the press plate. I think there's 4 of them there. So I always love when images have their own sentiments. I wanted the congrats just simply because it was a little bit larger for this. And because I had the bold florals with that bold background, I thought a larger sentiment was a little bit more appropriate. Now, when it came to the butterfly, I used my fingers to just bend the cardstock so that the wings popped up a little bit more, and I wanted them to be supported, so I added just a little bit of double-sided foam tape behind there so that it would pop up those butterfly wings and hold them in place. And then once that glue is dry, you can see what the finished card looks like. I absolutely love the final result. The second way I'm going to use that Whimsical Magnolias press plate is in my Better Press system. Now you can see that this press plate is larger than an A2 size, and you can see that with the foiling as well. Again, I only really want the flowers from the upper side of the plate. I don't necessarily need all of the florals. If you wanted all of them, just choose a bigger piece of cardstock. I knew that I wasn't necessarily going to need all of them, so I just stayed with an A2 size piece of Hammermill cardstock for this. I chose Hammermill because it was going to work best with the technique that I was going to do with this. I didn't necessarily need the impression from a Better Press, I just needed the images. So once that is done, and I just used the Better Press ink with it, for the technique that I'm doing, you could use whatever ink you're wanting. I'm going to use the layering stencil to stencil in my floral images. I'm using a sticky mat to hold my pieces as well as my stencil in place. The first color I'm using is Saltwater Taffy, and I'm using some Pink Fresh brushes. These brushes are really nice to hold in your hands, and they're great for doing light ink blending and then being able to add more color and build them up. So when I'm building the color and I'm adding a little bit more color to it, I'm being a little bit heavier towards the base of the flower or towards the center of the flower. I want to see a little bit of color variation between that base and the top. I always think it looks a little bit nicer when we don't have just completely solid stenciled images. For my second layer, I'm using Worn Lipstick, using the same stencil brush. I'll use that same stencil brush for all of my corally type colors. And once again, I am trying to be a little bit heavier towards the base of each petal, a little bit lighter towards the top or outer edge of the petals. For the third color, I'm using Abandoned Coral. So all coral colors here. I chose these colors because they were similar to the Copic colors that I used, a little bit more on the coral tone, but for the technique that I'm going to do, they're actually going to be a lot lighter in the end. So after that third one is done, I'm ready to go in with my green color for my stems. And I'm using some Rustic Wilderness. This is different than the greens that I use with my Copics. I wanted to do some stems that had a more green shade to them than the browns that I use with the Copics. So I chose the Rustic Wilderness. And again, the technique that I'm going to do, they're going to be a lot lighter in tone once I'm done. So once the stenciling is done, we're ready for the next step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these floral images and I'm going to turn them glitter. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some Sukwang tape, which is a strong double-sided tape. I'm going to cover my entire stenciled image, and then I am going to cover it with some microfine glitter. Now you can see I have a lot of excess of that tape on the side. I'll just cut that off and I will just stick it to the outside edge of my tape roll. I like to use that for gluing cards together, gluing different pieces together so it doesn't go to waste. I will use it eventually, and by having it on the edge of the tape roll, I have it exactly where I want it or need it next time I need that. You can also get this tape in sheets as well. I do find it's a lot more economical to get the rolls if you find that it's a technique that you like to do. Once I have that tape on there, I use the edge of that press plate just to make sure I don't have any air bubbles, to make sure that that tape has good contact with my cardstock. And then I peel that backing off and then completely cover it with some microfine glitter. Now, anywhere you don't necessarily want to use, that's where to use your fingers and touch the tape. If you touch the tape where, say, the florals are, it does affect the way that the glitter sticks to the tape, and you see that a little bit. So after putting that glitter on there, I use a little piece of that backing just to burnish that glitter in place. That flattens the glitter, it really makes it sparkle, and it really makes it stick to that tape, and I do that before I do my die cutting. Once that is done, I can place my die on top of that glittered image and then tape that in place, and I can die cut it. Now, when I die cut it, if you have super intricate dies, it does take a little bit. You might need a shim to die cut your piece when you do this technique. These dies are fairly simple, so everything came out without any problem. Again, if you have a really intricate die, you might have a little bit of a harder issue, but your dies will cut through that glitter, that tape, and that cardstock, no problem. I've done this many times, and it's just a fun technique to do. I really love doing this for Christmas cards because we like to add a little bit of extra metallic, a little bit of extra shimmer with Christmas cards. It works absolutely perfect. For my background for this one, I am still using the Pink Fresh brushes, and I'm using some broken china on the background. You can see that my blending is less than perfect for this. I'm not trying to get perfect blending here. I'm trying to get a little bit of a blue hue towards the outer, on here it shows the right edge, but I'm actually going to flip it around and it's going to be the outer left edge. Then I'm going to put my florals on top of it. So my florals are going to go where that blending is the darkest. For my mat for this one, I'm using some Dahlia Cardstock. I have that trimmed to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. And that piece of Hammermill Cardstock that I just did that ink blending on is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So that is going to go over top of this Dahlia piece here. And then I can start to assemble or lay out my flowers. I could do the same layout as I did for my first card, but I'm trying to do them different just to show you some different layouts and just different ways that you can use the same die cuts. When I first laid it out, I realized that I had that upper one in the same place that I had put it on the first card. So I just swapped them just to make them different, not for any reason other than that. I like that on the top, but again, trying to make different arrangements to show you some different arrangements with these. So once I have a layout that I like, and for this one I am using one of the sentiments from this set, I can put my acrylic block to the side and I can start gluing them down. And when we're gluing them, we're going to just be gluing the back side of that Hammermill cardstock. But when these die cut pieces go over top of a glittered one, it is going on top of the glitter, which is non-porous. So those areas are going to take a little bit longer for that glue to dry. Now, when I placed the first flower, I had placed it a little bit too close to the edge of the cardstock. So then when I placed the second cluster, it went a little bit over top of the edge and I wanted to pull it in a little bit more. You can see me adjusting it there. Then I'm going to put in that third one. So this cluster kind of focuses on the left side of the card towards the bottom. You could even flip this around and have this towards the right side of the top. You have many different options when it comes to pieces like this that have individual clusters, individual stems, or individual flowers. It gives you a lot more creative opportunities with what to do with them and where to lay out those flowers. To add a little bit of extra sparkle, I'm going to use the Sparkle Golden Illusion Gems, and I'm using them with my Crafty Meraki jewel picker. I am using the Barely Art glue in the fine tip bottle just to add some glue dots, and then picking those gems up with that jewel picker to place them. Now these gems have a few different sizes to them, and I typically will do larger gems towards the flower cluster and smaller gems towards the outside. That's the way that I like to do it, is the visual look that I like. You can add as many of these or as few. I tend to kind of go in the mid-range, shall we say, compared to other people that I've seen. I've seen some cards that have a lot more and some that have a lot less. And then when I do them, I typically will do clusters of 3, and then the odd cluster of 2, just so that it's not super predictable, or to give it a little bit of variety. So once that has dried for a few moments, here is the final result. I love the look of those flowers with the glitter all over them, and you can see that it did lighten up that color considerably. For my third card, I'm going to use the Whimsical Magnolias stamp set, and I'm going to use them with some Magicals pigment powders. This is the Victorian Bouquet Magicals. I've been using Magicals in a few different videos lately. I kind of go sporadically. I will use things and then do them in several videos and then just not use them for months or whatnot. I have been using the Alexandra's Artist ones in videos lately, and I wanted to use them with this stamp set, but I didn't want to use that same color palette, so I chose the Victorian Bouquet Magicals for this one. I want to use the green and the blue for my background, so I have a piece of distressed watercolor cardstock. I used a fan brush to just put a mixture of those two colors on my glass work surface here. You could use a Tim Holtz media mat as well if you wanted, but the glass work surface here works perfect for the look that I was going for. You can see how highly pigmented these Magicals are, so I really probably used more than I really needed to. I misted those Magicals on my glass surface, then dipped my cardstock in there. You could dip it multiple times if you want to cover the entire thing. I wanted a look that I had ink in some areas and then the white cardstock. And then while that ink is wet, I can use a paper towel to dab the excess off to lighten that color and to make sure that I don't have any harsh watermarks. When it comes to using the stamp, when I have a new stamp set, I always use my white eraser and I erase over top of the stamping surface just to remove any manufacturing residue. Make sure that that stamp will take ink really, really well. I'm also using my Misty stamping tool to place my piece of cardstock in. That way it's going to stay in one spot and not move. I have a waffle flower grip mat in there. That one stays in my Misty stamping tool and it holds the cardstock in place. Then I ink my stamp with some Versamark ink using some embossing powder tool on my cardstock ahead of time. I want to make sure when I emboss it that the ink or the embossing powder only sticks to where my stamped image is. So by using that embossing powder tool, I can make sure that that happens. I'm embossing this one with some gold embossing powder. I chose it because it coordinates well with the aura foil that I used in the first card. I typically like to use the same metallics in the same videos when I'm creating cards with similar products. I just prefer the look of it, but you could emboss this with any color you wanted if you wanted a different color. Once I have that embossing powder on there, I can use my embossing tool to melt that powder. And then I'm going to use the rest of the magical colors to watercolor my images. And because of that, this is stamped on watercolor cardstock. I realize now that I didn't mention that before. So I am going to take my Magicals. I am putting my jars to the side with the caps nearby. Sometimes with magical powders, when you see the jars, they don't necessarily look the same color as the final result. So by having the caps right beside them, I can remember exactly which jar is which and know which color I'm using. I'm using the brownie orange color to color in or watercolor my branches here. You could also use the green, but I wanted to make sure that these were going to show up, or whatever parts were going to be exposed were going to show up on top of my greeny blue background. That's all I need that color for. The other two colors are going to be for my flowers. So I'm using the coral color first, and I knew I was going to use these Magicals with this set. So when I chose my Copics for my first card, as well as my Distress ink colors for my second card. This was the color inspiration for how I chose those colors. I wanted to make sure, like I said before, I like to typically use the same or similar colors with different cards in the same video. I just think it looks aesthetically pleasing when you get to the end and show all of them together. And I wanted to show 3 different techniques with 3 different products, but I wanted the colors to be somewhat similar. So I start with that corally color and do a coat over the entire flower. And then I'm going in with the purple and I'm just putting dots of it at the base of the petals. I have a Zig water brush here, so the water is in the handle. So I also have a piece of paper towel to my right. Anytime I want to change my colors, I can squeeze my brush and take the excess water and flush my brush to clean it for the next color. The other thing I can do is I can use that to take excess color off of the brush of my brush, the bristles of my brush. And once I have that purple dotted in there, I take off the excess color and I will mix the pink or the coral and the purple together to blend the two together. By having that base coat of the coral on there, the whole petal is already damp. So when I start to dot in that purple, it starts to blend and bleed all on its own. Sometimes it'll need a little bit of help depending on how damp that flower is, but it's quite forgiving. You can always add a little bit of extra color if you need a little bit more. If you have too much color, I wipe my brush off to make sure that it's dry, and then I will use my brush to dot and remove excess color. If you have a lot of color, you can also use the corner of a piece of paper towel just to soak that color up as well. You can see how quickly it is to color in all of those flowers. Again, with every single one of them, I'm starting with the coral color, doing a base coat over the whole flower. If you are more comfortable, you could do petal by petal, but I find doing the entire flower works really, really quickly and really easily. And then I don't have to swap between the colors quite as often. Even though I'm using water on watercolor cardstock, it still stays wet long enough and I'm working quick enough that it's not drying on me while I'm going in with the purple. It's still staying wet enough. Having that paper towel to the side means I have a lot of control. I can add or I can remove excess color from my brush, or I can flush the color that's existing in there to change it to a different color. I use this brush all the time. I absolutely love it. I say it many times, but I tend to be a bit of a klutz. So using a brush where I'd have a glass of water on my desk is, for me, a recipe for disaster. So this works perfectly. It's nice and neat, and I need very few tools when I'm doing watercoloring. And you can see that I'm not like the most advanced watercolor by any stretch of the word. I love doing it, and I do it for the love of it. I don't do it for having watercolor masterpieces or anything. So I'm going to do all of these flowers, and once they are all watercolored, I will let them completely dry before I take the coordinating die and die cut them. You want to make sure that everything is completely dry. Now, by watercoloring these ahead of time, I find it's just a little bit easier. If you prefer, you could die cut these pieces first, and then you could watercolor them in after they are die cut. There's no right or wrong. Either one will work. I find it's just as easy to do it with everything all on the cardstock, all intact, doing it like this. But like I said, either way it will work. The bottom flower towards the top of the cardstock that you can see there isn't a complete flower, so I'm not even bothering to watercolor that. Once the flowers are complete, if I need to touch anything up, you can, but you do want to make sure that if you add a little bit of color in one area, just to make sure the entire petal is damp so that you don't get any harsh water lines. So this is how it looks after it is completely dried. Now I can line up my die with it. I can use some Best Ever craft tape to tape that die in place. I always like to tape my die in place to make sure that it's not going to shift and move on me when I do my die cutting. Then I put it through my Platinum 6 machine to die cut those pieces out. Now, I said it before in the video, and I'm going to say it again. I absolutely love the fact that this die is all connected and it die cuts all of the pieces at once. And I also love the fact that the stamp is all connected and you stamp all of the pieces at once. It makes it so quick and easy when you're creating. For this card, I'm once again using that Peacock Cardstock. This is a Hero Arts cardstock. I'm using that for the mat around my image. It's going to work perfectly with the blue and the green colors there and just really highlight those and frame it nicely. I have that Peacock Cardstock trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. My watercolor piece with the magicals, I trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So for this one, I want to have the branches kind of like they're coming in from the top left side. So I will position those in place. I am going to glue these to this watercolor cardstock before I assemble my card, mainly because if I have a branch just popping outside of my cardstock piece there, I want to be able to, or to ensure that I can trim it down. I don't want to have kind of a piece of a branch sticking out. I'm using this one piece at the top left there because when I stamped it and die cut it, it didn't have a complete image to it. So the edge of that cardstock piece is already cut, and it would look weird to have it just a little bit in or just a little bit out of that cardstock. So by putting those pieces in place and having that piece there, it just works perfectly for the design that I had planned. If I didn't already have that piece with the cut mark out of it, I would put it just outside of my cardstock there, and then once dry, I would take my scissors and just trim it. Because I'm already waiting for those flowers to dry, I decided I might as well wait for my sentiment to dry as well. This is one of the sentiments that was created the same time as the flowers were stamped and embossed and die cut. With all of that done, I can glue it to the card. I didn't actually wait quite long enough for this glue on the sentiment to set, but that's okay. I can put it back on again. I always love with liquid glue that you have the freedom to shimmy and move things in place if you didn't quite get it right the first time. And I didn't get my image piece right the first time. So because it was liquid glue, I can easily just move it and shimmy it in place. For a little bit of extra visual texture, I'm using the watercoloring mixing set from Spellbinders and just adding some gold splatters to the background. I use my Mighty Mister to mist it with water, and then a nice big round brush to mix it with the gold watercolor. And I use that same round brush against my fingers to flick that brush and add that splatter. For a little bit of extra texture, I'm using that same glisten stickles that I used on my first card and letting those dry completely. Once that is dry, here is the final result. I absolutely love the look of those magicals on the florals. The video really doesn't show off the beautiful shimmer that you get from those magicals. And by adding the extra gold speckles on the back, it adds some visual texture to that as well. Again, tying in with that gold. Then we have our beautiful shimmery glitter flowers. Again, another way to add some great shimmer and shine to cards. Like I said before, perfect for Christmas time, but obviously not something that you have to leave for Christmas. And then we have our first card done with that beautiful aura foil and the Copic markers, adding so much shine to it with that foil. I love that final look. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.